The hook. Ethan adjusted his helmet as he stepped onto the surface of the forgotten planet Erelin. The ground beneath his boots crunched like brittle glass, the air thick with silence. His ship, a small exploration vessel, stood behind him like a lone beacon in the eerie wasteland. The sky was a pale green, dotted with two suns that hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows. The planet had been abandoned for centuries, its once thriving civilization wiped out in a war no one remembered. Yet the data logs he discovered hinted at something valuable still hidden here. He scanned the area, his pulse quickening. The ruins of ancient buildings surrounded him, their walls etched with strange, glowing symbols. They pulsed faintly, as if alive. Ethan frowned, adjusting the scanner on his wrist. The readings were strange, energy spikes that made no sense. For a planet declared lifeless, it felt anything but. As he moved deeper into the ruins, the feeling of being watched gnawed at him. His gloved hand hovered near the laser pistol on his belt. The silence wasn't natural. It pressed against him, heavy and suffocating. He couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a sound, a soft, echoing whisper. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. The whisper wasn't human. It was melodic, almost hypnotic, like a song carried by the wind. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the crumbled walls and shattered statues. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady despite the unease twisting in his chest. The whisper stopped, replaced by a stillness so profound it made his ears ring. He pressed forward, curiosity and caution battling within him. He wasn't sure if he wanted to find the source of the sound or run back to his ship. The ruins grew darker as the towering structures blocked the twin suns. Strange plants with glowing leaves crept along the walls, their faint luminescence casting eerie patterns on the ground. Then he saw her. At first, Ethan thought it was a statue, carved from some shimmering material that caught the dim light. But the figure moved, her glowing eyes locking onto his. She was tall, her skin a pale blue that seemed to shimmer like water under moonlight. Her hair flowed around her like liquid silver, and her face held an ethereal beauty that made Ethan forget to breathe for a moment. "You came," she said, her voice the same haunting melody he heard moments ago. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but there was something unsettling in her expression, something possessive. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to his pistol. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice firm. "What are you doing here?" She tilted her head, studying him as if he were a puzzle. "I am Mira," she said softly, "the last of my kind." Her gaze didn't waver, and Ethan felt as if she were looking straight into his soul. "The last of your kind," he echoed, his mind racing. The war that had destroyed this planet's civilization had been centuries ago. If she was telling the truth, how had she survived? And why hadn't anyone known about her existence? "I have waited," she continued, stepping closer. Her movements were graceful, almost otherworldly. "Waited for someone like you, a human." Ethan took a cautious step back, his instincts screaming at him to keep his distance. "Why me? What do you want?" Nira stopped, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't understand, but you will. You are special. I've seen it in your kind, the resilience, the fire. You are unlike any I've ever known." Her words sent a chill down his spine. "You've been watching humans?" he asked, gripping his pistol tighter. "For centuries," she replied. "Through the remnants of your transmissions, the fragments of your history, I have studied your kind. You fascinate me, Ethan." The sound of his name coming from her lips startled him. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, his voice rising. She smiled, and it wasn't a comforting expression. "I know much about you, Ethan. I've seen your dreams, your fears, your hopes. You've been alone, searching for something, searching for meaning, just like me." Ethan felt his chest tighten. The scanner on his wrist beeped frantically, picking up energy levels off the charts. "Stay back," he warned, raising his pistol. But Nira didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming, her voice like a caress. "You can't leave," she said, her tone soft but final. "You belong here now. You belong to me." Ethan's heart pounded as she raised a hand, and the air around him seemed to hum with energy. He didn't know what she was, or what she wanted, but one thing was clear. He was no longer in control. Nira's obsession begins. Ethan paced back and forth in the dimly lit room of the ancient structure that Nira had led him to. The walls pulsed faintly with the same glowing symbols he had seen earlier, their alien patterns shifting like a living organism. He couldn't tell if it was technology, magic, or something entirely beyond human understanding. Whatever it was, it made his skin crawl. Nira sat cross-legged on a raised platform in the center of the room, her glowing eyes following Ethan's every move. She was eerily calm, her gaze never breaking, as if she was cataloging his every thought and movement. "You're wasting your energy," she said finally, her voice soft but carrying an unnerving certainty. "You can't leave. This planet no longer obeys the rules you're used to." Ethan stopped mid-step, his frustration bubbling over. "You keep saying I can't leave, but why? What do you want from me?" Nira tilted her head slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "Isn't it obvious? I want you. You are fascinating." The word hit him like a slap. Fascinating. He wasn't some artifact or specimen to be studied. His fists clenched as he stared at her, his fear giving way to anger. "I'm not your plaything," he said firmly. "I don't care how powerful you are or what you think you know about me. I'm getting off this planet." She stood gracefully, her movements fluid and almost hypnotic. "You misunderstand me, Ethan," she said, taking a step closer. "This isn't about power or control. This is about connection. I've been alone for so long, watching, waiting. You're kind, humans. You're different. You burn so brightly, even when you're fragile." Her words carried a strange weight, and Ethan felt a pang of sympathy despite himself. But he shook it off, his survival instincts screaming at him to keep his distance. "If you've been watching humans for so long, you must know we don't like being caged," he said, his voice sharp. "Let me go." Nira's smile faded, and for the first time, a flicker of something darker crossed her face. "Do you think I chose this?" she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "To be the last of my kind. To watch everything I love turn to ash. I didn't choose this existence, Ethan. But you are a choice." Her words unsettled him, but he refused to let her see it. "A choice? What does that even mean?" She stepped closer, and he instinctively backed away until his shoulders hit the cold, pulsing wall. "It means you're not here by accident," she said. "You came because you were meant to. You feel it, don't you? That pull, that connection." Ethan's mind raced. Was she implying that he had been drawn here somehow? The idea was absurd, but deep down, he couldn't deny that something about this planet, and about her, felt off, like an itch he couldn't scratch, a question he couldn't answer. He tried to push past her, but she moved with an unnatural speed, blocking his path. Her hand reached out, brushing lightly against his chest, and he felt a surge of warmth spread through him. It wasn't painful, but it was deeply unsettling. It was as if she had reached into him, touching something beyond the physical. "I've seen your memories," she said softly. "Your pain, your loneliness. You think you hide it well, but it's written all over you. That's why you explore, isn't it? Why you risk your life on dead worlds. You're searching for something, someone." "Stop," Ethan said, his voice trembling. He felt exposed, like she had peeled back layers of himself he hadn't even acknowledged. "You don't know me." "But I do," she replied, her voice filled with both sorrow and intensity. "More than you know yourself. That's why I can't let you go. You're what I've been waiting for." Ethan's breath hitched as her words sank in. This wasn't just fascination. This was obsession, a deep, unrelenting need that bordered on desperation. He realized with a sinking feeling that she wasn't just trying to keep him here. She believed he was her salvation, her only lifeline in a universe that had abandoned her. "Please," he said, trying a different tactic. "If you let me leave, I can help you. I can tell others about you. Maybe there's a way to save your world, to bring your people back." Her expression hardened, and the glowing symbols on the walls flared brighter. "You don't understand," she said. "There is no one else. No one who would care. They left me to die, Ethan. I won't let you do the same." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a strange energy that made Ethan's hair stand on end. He realized he was out of options. Reasoning with her wouldn't work, not while she was blinded by her fixation. If he wanted to survive, he'd have to find another way, one that didn't involve relying on her mercy. But as he looked into her glowing eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely wrong. He was searching for something. He just didn't know if it was her. Ethan's struggle. The ruins seemed to grow darker with every passing hour, as if the planet itself was responding to Nura's emotions. Ethan sat by a faintly glowing pillar, his head in his hands, trying to make sense of his situation. Nura's words echoed in his mind. Her obsession, her desperation, her refusal to let him go. He had come to this desolate world in search of artifacts, not to become the lifeline for a being who seemed to teeter on the edge of sanity. Nura was nowhere in sight at the moment, but he could feel her presence lingering in the air. She wasn't watching him directly, but he knew she was aware of him. The walls of the ancient structure pulsed faintly, as if alive, and the symbols etched into them seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. It was unsettling, to say the least. Ethan checked his wrist scanner again, hoping for something, anything, that could help him. But the readings were as erratic as ever, spiking with unidentifiable energy signatures that offered no explanation or solutions. He tapped at the device in frustration, but the faint beeping only reinforced the truth. He was trapped, and Nura was the key to his survival. But how could he reason with someone who saw him as more than just a person? To her, he was an answer, a solution to her centuries of loneliness. That kind of fixation wasn't just dangerous, it was suffocating. Suddenly, the air around him shifted, and he felt the faint hum of energy. He looked up to find Nura standing at the entrance to the chamber. Her glowing eyes locked onto his, and her expression was unreadable. In her hands, she held something, an orb that pulsed with the same light as the walls. "You haven't eaten," she said softly, her tone calm but carrying an undertone of command. "This will nourish you." Ethan eyed the orb warily. "What is it?" "Food," she replied simply, walking toward him. "The energy of this planet sustains me. It will do the same for you." He hesitated, unsure whether to trust her, but his stomach growled, and the thought of going without food any longer wasn't appealing. He reached out cautiously, taking the orb from her hands. It felt warm and slightly alive, as though it was pulsing with its own heartbeat. "Thank you," he said, his voice flat. He took a bite, the taste surprisingly sweet and satisfying. For a moment, he allowed himself to enjoy it, but the weight of her gaze reminded him of the situation. She wasn't being kind out of generosity. She was keeping him alive for her own reasons. "You're afraid of me," Nura said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. Ethan froze mid-bite, then slowly lowered the orb. "Wouldn't you be?" he asked. "You're powerful, and you're holding me here against my will." Her expression flickered with something, regret, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I don't want to hurt you," she said, "but I can't let you leave. You're too important." "Important how?" Ethan demanded, his frustration spilling over. "You keep saying I'm special, that I'm some kind of answer. But I'm just a man, Nura, a human who stumbled onto the wrong planet." Her glowing eyes softened, and she sat down across from him, her movements graceful and deliberate. "You don't understand what it means to be truly alone," she said, to watch everything and everyone you've ever known vanish, while you remain. I've seen stars burn out and galaxies shift, Ethan. And through it all, I've waited. For what? He asked, his voice quieter now. Why me? She reached out, her hand hovering just above his. Because you burn, she said softly. Humans burn with a light unlike anything I've ever seen. Your emotions, your will, your capacity to love and hate. It's intoxicating. Ethan pulled his hand away, uneasy with her words. You don't know me, he said firmly. You think you do because you've been watching us, but you don't. Humans aren't perfect, Nera. We're flawed. We fight, we hurt each other, and we make mistakes. She tilted her head, studying him as if he were a puzzle. And yet you endure. That's what makes you extraordinary. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I get that you've been through a lot. I can't imagine what it's like to lose everything. But keeping me here isn't the answer. You can't force someone to stay with you. That's not connection. That's imprisonment. Her expression darkened, and the room seemed to hum with tension. You think I don't know that? She said, her voice sharp. Do you think I want to be this way? To feel this emptiness? I didn't choose this, Ethan, but I can't let it destroy me. Ethan stood, his frustration boiling over. And you think I'm the solution? That I can just fix centuries of loneliness and pain? I'm not a savior, Nera. I'm just a man. She rose to her feet as well, her glowing eyes filled with an intensity that made him step back. You don't have to be a savior, she said. You just have to stay. Her words sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just obsession. It was desperation. He realized then that she wasn't just trying to keep him here out of loneliness. She truly believed that he was the only thing keeping her from losing herself entirely. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. If he couldn't reason with her, he'd have to find another way. But the longer he stayed, the more he felt her pull, a strange, unexplainable connection that both frightened and intrigued him. The danger of obsession. Ethan woke to an unnatural silence. The faint hum that always seemed to fill the air on this strange planet was gone, replaced by a stillness so profound it felt suffocating. He sat up on the cold, glowing floor, his heart racing. Something was wrong. Nera? He called, his voice echoing in the empty chamber. There was no response. He stood and scanned the room. The symbols on the walls, which usually pulsed with faint, rhythmic light, were dim and unmoving. It was as if the life had drained out of the place. A cold dread crept up his spine. Nera's presence was absent, and despite everything that frightened him, her absence felt like the eye of a storm, a calm that came before chaos. Ethan stepped cautiously into the corridor outside the chamber, his footsteps echoing eerily. The walls here were darker, the glowing vines that once illuminated the path now shriveled and lifeless. The entire structure seemed to be decaying, its energy fading rapidly. He gripped his laser pistol tightly, unsure of what he might find. Nera, he called again, his voice shaking slightly. This time, he heard something, a low, mournful hum, like a distant melody carried on the wind. It wasn't a sound he had ever heard before, and yet it stirred something deep within him. He followed it, his unease growing with every step. The hum led him to a massive hall, its ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. At the center of the room stood Mara, her figure illuminated by a faint, pulsating light that seemed to radiate from her body. She was kneeling, her head bowed, her silver hair flowing around her like liquid starlight. The air around her was thick with tension, almost suffocating. Nera, Ethan said, stepping closer. What's going on? She didn't respond at first. Her hands rested on the floor, and the symbols beneath her glowed faintly, their light flickering like a dying flame. When she finally looked up, her glowing eyes were filled with an intensity that made him take a step back. I tried to suppress it, she said, her voice trembling. To hold it back, but it's too strong. What are you talking about? Ethan asked, his grip tightening on his pistol. "What's too strong?" "My nature," she replied, standing slowly. "I was made to be a weapon, a conduit for the energy of this planet. My people created me to harness its power, to fight their wars. But when they were gone, that power, it didn't go away. It consumed me." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "You said your people abandoned you," he said carefully. "Was it because of this?" Nera's expression hardened. "They feared me," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "They feared what I had become. I was supposed to be their salvation, but I became their curse. When the war ended, they left me behind, sealing this planet to keep me contained." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just the last of her kind. She was the reason her kind was gone. The energy that pulsed through her wasn't just a part of her, it was her. And it was dangerous. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked, his voice low. "Because I didn't want you to see me as they did," she said, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "I didn't want you to fear me." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Nera, if this energy is consuming you, we need to find a way to stop it. Maybe." "There is no stopping it," she snapped, her voice echoing through the hall. The symbols on the walls flared to life, their light flickering wildly. "I've tried for centuries, Ethan. Do you think I haven't searched for answers? There is no escape from what I am." Ethan took a cautious step back. "Then what do you want from me?" he asked. "Why did you bring me here?" Her expression softened, and for a moment, she looked almost human. "Because you make me feel alive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you're here, the chaos inside me quiets. The energy listens, it doesn't fight me." Ethan's chest tightened. She wasn't just obsessed with him. She believed he was the only thing keeping her from losing control. And if she lost control, he didn't want to think about what that would mean. "Nera, this isn't sustainable," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You can't rely on me to fix this. I'm just one person. What happens if I can't stay?" Her eyes flashed with anger, and the room seemed to vibrate with her energy. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "If you leave, this planet will collapse. The energy will consume me, and it will destroy everything." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. She was telling the truth. He could see it in her eyes. But he couldn't stay here forever. He had to find a way to help her without losing himself in the process. "Then we need to figure this out," he said, forcing himself to stay calm. "Together, there has to be a way to release this energy safely." Her expression softened again, but there was a desperation in her eyes that made his heart ache. "You would help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "But you have to trust me, Nera. You have to let me try." She hesitated, the tension in the room easing slightly. "I'll trust you," she said finally. "But if you betray me—" "I won't," Ethan said quickly. "I promise." Escape plan. Ethan sat on the edge of a crumbled platform, staring out into the eerie landscape of the planet. The ruins stretched far beyond the horizon. Broken spires and decayed walls bathed in the dim, greenish glow of the twin suns. The oppressive silence was only broken by the faint hum of energy that lingered in the air, a constant reminder of Nera's power and the planet's precarious state. He turned the small device in his hands, a piece of ancient alien technology he had scavenged earlier. It looked like part of a control panel, its surface etched with the same glowing symbols that adorned the walls of the ruins. If he was right, and that was a big if, this could be the key to activating the dormant spacecraft he had stumbled upon in the depths of the ruins. But there was a problem. Nera. Ethan knew she wouldn't let him leave. She believed he was the only thing keeping her from losing control of the immense energy coursing through her body. Her desperation to keep him close was as dangerous as the planet's unstable energy fields. If he wanted to survive and escape, he needed a plan. "Thinking of leaving?" Mira's voice cut through the silence, startling him. He looked up to see her standing a few feet away, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She moved silently, her presence as unsettling as ever. Ethan quickly slipped the device into his pocket, masking his actions with a casual shrug. "Just thinking," he said, his tone neutral. Her gaze lingered on him, sharp and penetrating. "You're not a very good liar, Ethan." Ethan forced a smile. "I wasn't lying. Just trying to figure out how to help you. That's all." Her expression softened, and she stepped closer, her movements fluid and graceful. "You're kind," she said, her voice almost tender. "But I know what you're thinking. You want to leave. You want to escape me." He stood, his body tense. "Can you blame me? I didn't ask to be here, Nira. I didn't ask for any of this. And I didn't ask to be abandoned." She shot back, her voice rising. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, a warning of her power. "But we don't always get to choose our fates, do we?" Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "I get it. You've been through hell. But keeping me here against my will isn't the answer. If you want my help, you have to trust me." "Trust you," she repeated, her tone bitter. "Trust that you won't leave me the moment you find a way out. Trust that you won't abandon me like everyone else." He hesitated, knowing she had a point. But he also knew he couldn't stay here forever. He needed to distract her, to buy himself enough time to finish repairing the spacecraft. "I'm not trying to abandon you," he said carefully. "I'm trying to find a solution, a way to help both of us." Her glowing eyes narrowed, studying him as if trying to read his thoughts. "What kind of solution?" she asked. Ethan gestured toward the ruins. "This planet, it's not just decaying. It's falling apart. You said it yourself. The energy is unstable. If we don't do something, it's going to collapse, with both of us on it." "And what do you propose?" she asked, her voice skeptical. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a calculated risk. "I found something," he said, pulling the device from his pocket. "It looks like it might be part of a control system. If we can figure out how it works, we might be able to stabilize the energy, or at least buy us some time." Her expression shifted, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "You think you can stabilize it?" "I can try," he said, forcing confidence into his voice. "But I'll need your help. You know this planet better than anyone." She studied him for a long moment, her glowing eyes unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "Show me." Ethan led her back to the spacecraft he had discovered, a sleek alien vessel buried beneath the ruins. Its hull was covered in the same glowing symbols, and the faint hum of energy emanated from its core. The ship was ancient but remarkably intact, a relic of the civilization that had once thrived here. Nira placed her hand on the ship's surface, her expression unreadable. "This was one of ours," she said softly. "A warship designed to harness the planet's energy." "Can it still fly?" Ethan asked, his heart pounding. She closed her eyes, her glowing fingertips tracing the symbols on the hull. The ship seemed to respond to her touch, the symbols flaring to life. "It's damaged, but it might be possible," she said, "if we can repair the core." Ethan nodded, relief flooding through him. "Then let's do it." But as they worked together to repair the ship, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Nira was watching him too closely. Her movements were precise, her knowledge of the ship's systems uncanny. And yet, there was a desperation in her gaze that made him uneasy. "You're planning something," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but sharp. Ethan froze, his hands hovering over the control panel. "I'm trying to fix the ship," he said carefully. Her eyes narrowed. "You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I don't feel it, the pull of your thoughts, your intentions? You're lying to me, Ethan." He turned to face her, his heart pounding. "I'm trying to save us," he said firmly. "Both of us." Her expression darkened, and the air around them grew heavy with tension. "If you betray me," she said, her voice trembling with anger and fear, "there will be no escape. Not for you. Not for anyone." The turning point. The spacecraft's core emitted a low, steady hum, its symbols glowing brighter with every passing moment. Ethan stood beside the control panel, his hands moving quickly over the alien interface as he worked to bring the ship back online. Nira hovered nearby, her glowing eyes watching his every move with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The tension between them was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Ethan's mind raced as he worked. The ship was their only way off the planet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that activating it would trigger something far beyond his control. Nira's connection to the planet and its energy was deeper than she had fully admitted, and the ship was a piece of that connection. If he wasn't careful, it could either save them or destroy them both. "You're hesitating," Nira said, her voice soft but cutting through the silence like a blade. Ethan glanced at her, his jaw tightening. "I'm being careful," he replied. "This isn't exactly user-friendly." "You're stalling," she said, stepping closer. "What are you afraid of?" "I'm not afraid," Ethan shot back, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "But if I make a mistake, this thing could blow us to pieces." Nira tilted her head, studying him intently. "You're lying again," she said, her tone eerily calm. "You're afraid of me." Ethan paused, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Can you blame me?" he asked, turning to face her. "You've made it pretty clear that you're willing to do whatever it takes to keep me here. How am I supposed to trust you?" Her glowing eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "This isn't about control. It's about survival. If you leave, the balance will break. The energy will consume me, and this planet will collapse." "That's not my fault, Nira," Ethan said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I didn't ask to be part of this." "You didn't have to," she replied, stepping closer. "You were drawn here, just like I was created to stay here. It's all connected, Ethan. Don't you feel it?" He didn't answer. The truth was, he did feel it. A strange, unexplainable pull that had started the moment he landed on the planet. It wasn't just Nira's presence. It was the planet itself, its energy wrapping around him like invisible tendrils. But he couldn't let himself get caught up in it. He had to focus on the task at hand. "Nira, if we don't leave this planet, we're both going to die," he said, turning back to the control panel. "I'm trying to save us." "And I'm trying to save you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You think I'm holding you here because I need you. It's not just about me, Ethan. This planet's energy is tied to you now. If you leave, it will follow you. It will destroy you." Her words sent a chill down his spine. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "How is that even possible?" She hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering. "The energy isn't just a part of the planet," she said finally. "It's alive. It's sentient. And it's chosen you." Ethan stared at her, his mind reeling. "Chosen me? For what?" "To survive," she said simply. "The energy needs a host, and it's decided that host is you." He took a step back, his heart pounding. "No, that's not happening. I'm not going to be some battery for this planet." "You already are," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "Don't you see? The longer you've been here, the more it's bonded with you. That's why you can't leave. If you try, it will rip you apart." Ethan's breath came in short, shallow gasps as her words sank in. He looked down at his hands, half expecting to see them glowing with the same energy that pulsed through the planet. But they looked normal, human. He clenched them into fists, trying to steady himself. "There has to be another way," he said finally, his voice shaking. "If this energy is alive, then maybe we can reason with it. Maybe we can find a way to release it." Nira shook her head, her expression pained. "I've tried," she said. "For centuries, I've tried. It doesn't listen. It doesn't care. It only knows how to consume." Ethan stared at her, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll make it listen," he said. Together. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she looked almost hopeful. "You would stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," he said firmly. "But I'll help you find a way to end this. To free both of us. I'm not giving up, Mira. And neither should you." Her expression shifted, a flicker of determination crossing her face. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she said. "Probably both," Ethan replied with a faint smile. "Now help me finish this." Together, they worked to stabilize the ship's core, their movements tense but purposeful. Mira's knowledge of the ship's systems was invaluable, and for the first time, Ethan felt like they might actually have a chance. But the energy around them grew more erratic with every passing moment, the walls of the ruins trembling as if the planet itself was fighting back. As the core flared to life, Ethan felt a surge of hope. But that hope was short-lived. The ship's systems blared a warning, the symbols on the control panel flashing red. "What's happening?" he shouted over the noise. Nara's face was grim. "The energy knows what we're doing," she said. "It's trying to stop us." A heartfelt conclusion. The ground shook violently as the ship's core reached full activation, its energy pulsing in defiance of the planet's overwhelming grip. Ethan clung to the control panel, his heart pounding as warning lights flashed across the alien interface. Beside him, Nira stood still, her glowing eyes focused on the chaos unfolding around them. The walls of the ancient ruins trembled, their glowing symbols flickering like dying embers. It felt as if the entire planet was alive, fighting to keep them trapped. "We don't have much time," Ethan shouted over the deafening hum of the ship's systems. "If we don't launch now, we're not getting out of here." Nira turned to him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she seemed almost detached, as though weighing an impossible choice. Then she spoke, her voice steady despite the storm of energy around them. "If we leave, the energy will follow you. It will tear through the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. You'll save yourself, but at what cost?" Ethan hesitated, her words hitting him like a blow. He had come to this planet as an explorer, searching for answers and adventure. Now he was faced with a decision that could shape the fate of countless lives. The weight of it was suffocating, but he forced himself to stay focused. "There has to be another way," he said, his voice firm. "We can't let this thing destroy everything, but I'm not going to just sit here and die." Nira's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw something in her eyes that looked like peace. "There is another way," she said quietly, "but it requires a sacrifice." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" She stepped closer, her glowing hand reaching out to touch the ship's core. The energy seemed to respond to her presence, calming slightly, as if recognizing its master. "This energy was never meant to be contained," she explained. "It's a force of creation and destruction, bound to the will of my people. But I'm the last of them, and it's tied to me. If I go with it, if I let it consume me, it will stay here, the planet will collapse, and the energy will die with it." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "You're saying you're willing to sacrifice yourself?" She nodded, a faint, sad smile crossing her lips. "I was never meant to exist this long," she said. "My life has been nothing but loneliness and pain. But meeting you, it reminded me of what it means to feel alive, to have hope. And I want to give you that chance, to live, to be free." "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "There has to be another way. You don't have to do this." "There isn't," she said gently. "You know that as well as I do. But you can honor me by living, Ethan, by carrying the memory of my people with you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to fight, but deep down, he knew she was right. The ship was their only chance, and if the energy followed them, it would be catastrophic. He clenched his fists, his frustration and sorrow threatening to overwhelm him. "I don't want to leave you," he said finally, his voice breaking. "You don't deserve this." Nira stepped closer, her glowing eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Sometimes we don't get to choose our endings," she said, "but we can choose what we leave behind." Ethan swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. "I won't forget you," he said. "I promise." She smiled, and for the first time, it was genuine. "I know you won't." With that, she turned to the ship's control panel, her hands moving gracefully over the alien interface. The ship began to power up, its engines roaring to life. The ground trembled violently as the planet's energy surged, but Nira stood firm, her presence calming the chaos. Ethan climbed into the ship, his hands shaking as he strapped himself into the pilot's seat. The control panel lit up, displaying a countdown to launch. He glanced back at Nira one last time, his heart heavy with guilt and gratitude. "Nira," he called. She turned to face him, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Thank you." She nodded, her expression serene. "Goodbye, Ethan." As the countdown reached 0, the ship's engines roared, and it shot into the sky. Ethan watched through the viewport as the planet below began to collapse, its surface breaking apart as the energy consumed it. A brilliant, blinding light filled the horizon. And then, silence. The ship broke free of the atmosphere, entering the cold expanse of space. Ethan sat back in his seat, his chest heaving with exhaustion and emotion. The planet was gone, and with it, Nira. But her sacrifice had saved him, and countless others. He stared out at the stars, his mind racing. Nira had given him a second chance, and he was determined to make it count. Her story, her people's story, wouldn't end with her. He would carry it with him, a testament to her courage and the bond they had shared.